Have you ever wondered how manga came to be? Well, here's the history of manga in 60 seconds. Hi, I'm here to tell you the history of manga from its beginnings through its golden age and all the way up until now. So let's just get right into it. We have to go all the way back to China in around 800 CE, where we find the earliest forms of manga in Chinese scroll paintings, which were basically like illustrated novels, and these would be passed down through generations by master to apprentice. The word manga itself comes from the Japanese word man, which means to draw or doodle, and ga, which means picture. So together they make manga, literally meaning pictures or drawings. One of the most famous scroll painters was a guy named Toba Soryu, who painted over 30 scrolls during his life. The main character in each scroll would always be an artisan of some kind, such as a carpenter or a painter, who would use their skills to outsmart some nobles and make them look foolish. These stories were called mangas, and they inspired many later manga artists. However, it wasn't until 1192 that we see the first true manga artist, Kitazawa Roku. He was the first person to publish a collection of short comic-style stories in a book format, but he didn't publish under his real name for fear of getting in trouble with the government. Instead, he published his work under the name Shikitsuya Chokin, which means a wandering artist. This book, Chokin Mangas, was filled with satirical drawings of nobles and members of the clergy, much like Tobo Soryu's paintings. But unlike those paintings, Choikin's drawings were meant to be funny and not very serious. This set the stage for all future manga, which would always focus on satire and making fun of society. Around 1700, we see another big shift in manga. It became more story-focused and less joke-focused. And this is also when we start to see the influence of Western art. Because of this, we started to see more realistic people and environments instead of the highly stylized ones that we had before. We also saw the rise of female manga artists during this time, something that would continue on and become huge in the future. The most important thing about this time period, though, was the introduction of the floating world genre, which featured stories about merchants, artisans, gamblers, criminals, courtesans, and other disreputable characters. These sorts of stories are still popular today, but back then they were brand new. They gave artists more freedom to draw whatever they wanted, and they quickly became the most popular type of manga. Stories featuring historical figures or religious figures were now out of bounds because the government started cracking down on any sort of criticism. So artists had to be careful about what they drew. But this only made them more creative, and we saw the rise of some amazing artists during this time like Suzuki Chokuyu, who was one of the first big names in manga history. But unfortunately, during the mid-1800s, the government banned all publications that weren't educational or religious in nature, which basically destroyed the manga industry at the time. Many artists had to hide their work underground or change professions, and it wouldn't be until after World War II that manga would really take off again. The year is 1945, and World War II has just ended. Japan is devastated, but slowly things start to get better. People needed something to lift their spirits, and what better way to do that than with comics? So manga starts to appear everywhere. Food shortages are a big problem, and manga artists took notice of this. Osamu Tezuka, one of the biggest names in manga history, created a character named Kimba the White Wolf, whose adventures took place in a fantasy version of Africa. Kimba is considered to be the predecessor of the modern shonen manga hero, and his adventures were a welcome distraction from the harsh realities of life in post-war Japan. This also helped to establish the two basic genres of manga, which are yonkoma manga, or four-panel manga, which is usually comedic in nature, and the second is longer serialized manga, which features more serious themes. Serialized manga can also be broken down further into different genres such as shonen, which is aimed at young boys, shoujo, which is aimed at young girls and seinen, and yosei, which are aimed at older boys and girls respectively. Osamu Tezuka was a prolific artist, and he created dozens of manga series during his lifetime. One of his most famous works is Astro Boy, who debuted in 1951. Astro Boy was a robot who looked and acted like a young boy, and he had many adventures helping humans and fighting evil robots. Astro Boy was a huge hit, and he helped to usher in a golden age of manga. The next 20 years saw the rise of many legendary artists and series like Oda Kazumasa, creator of Oni no Sona or My Neighbor Totoro, Fujiko Fujio, creators of Doraemon, Osamu Akimoto, creator of Sazai-san, and of course Hayao Miyazaki, who started his career as an animator but then went on to direct many famous anime films like Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke. But as the 1960s and 70s rolled on, people started to complain that manga was becoming too commercialized. Sure, there were still plenty of amazing artists and series coming out during this time, but it seemed like the focus was more on money than on quality. And this led to the Gekiga movement, which basically translates to comics as art. Creators who identified with this movement focused on creating deeper, more meaningful stories that dealt with adult themes. This led to manga being taken more seriously as an art form, and critical and commercial success started to happen more often. Artists like Gigi, Fujita, and Monkey Punch were huge during this time and paved the way for many artists today who want to create more mature-themed manga. But as we move towards the late 1970s and early 80s, we start to see a decline in manga sales. People started reading less manga and buying less manga-related merchandise. Many companies folded and others scaled back on their operations. However, there was one series that managed to defy the odds, and that was Dragon Ball. Created by Akira Toriyama, Dragon Ball started off as a parody of the classic Monkey series, but it quickly grew into something much more. By the end of its run in 1995, Dragon Ball was the best-selling manga of all time, and it would inspire a whole new generation of manga artists. And this brings us to the modern age of manga, which started with the release of the manga series Yawara, a judo girl, in 1989. Yotsuba's author, Naoko Takahashi, was one of the first women to break into the traditionally male-dominated manga industry. She revolutionized the way manga was written and drawn, and she opened the door for many other women to follow in her footsteps. Of course, there's still a long way to go when it comes to gender equality in manga, but Takahashi's impact on the industry cannot be overstated. Another huge part of modern manga is the internet. The internet has allowed for many new series to reach a wider audience, and it's given indie artists a platform to showcase their work. Websites like Pixiv and Tumblr have helped to promote manga to a more international audience, and services like Crunchyroll and Funimation have brought manga to a wider audience outside of Japan. And lastly, we need to talk about the biggest manga of all time, One Piece. One Piece is a pirate adventure manga that has been running since 1997, and it shows no signs of stopping. The story follows the adventures of Monkey D. Luffy and his crew of pirates as they search for the legendary treasure known as One Piece. One Piece is the most popular manga of all time, and it has inspired a whole new generation of manga artists. And that's the history of manga. If you like this video, check out my channel for more videos about anime and manga.